Okay, guys, so today we start the study of logic, and logic is an art slash science that has been given to us by Aristotle. So here we go again. Aristotle rears his head one more time in this course. While he invented logic, it was further developed through the centuries, and in particular during the Middle Ages. Okay, so the medievals, as we often call them, the scholars of the Middle Ages, took Aristotle's logic and developed it out further in various ways, so that some of the terms and other ideas that we use today actually come from the medievals developing Aristotle's logic. And for that reason, some of the terms are in Latin because, of course, Latin was the language of all of Western Europe in the medieval period. So, let's get right to the issue here of logic. Logic studies inference. So I'm going to write the word here, inference. All right, inference. And you may have heard before, you've heard someone say, perhaps, I inferred this or I inferred that. And you may have a rough idea that this means I reasoned. And in a certain sense it does. It means that I reasoned. But let me give you a little more precise idea or definition of what inference is. Okay? When you infer, you move from what you know to what you can know based on what you know. Okay? Let me say that again. When you infer, when you carry out an inference, you move from what you know to what you can know based on what you know. All right, so based on what I already know, I infer something else. All right, so as I look out the window of my library here, I see light. I infer, therefore, it's daytime. Now, see, that inference could be wrong. It could be that someone's got a gigantic, really powerful light out there, electric light, and they're shining it down. But that's highly unlikely. So it doesn't matter whether I'm right or not. My inference was a good inference, because given everything we know about the world, if it's light like this outside, it almost certainly is daytime. All right? So we make inferences all the time. You make inferences all the time. If I walk inside the house dripping water and my shoes squeaking, it's probably an indication that it's raining outside. Doesn't have to be that way, but it's still a good inference given everything we know about the world. That is the most likely explanation, is that it was raining outside. It could be that I walked through a sprinkler, I stepped in a puddle, or I have some weird psychological problem. Every time I'm about to come into a building, I pour water on my head. I mean, that's possible, but it's just unlikely. So I made a good inference there. So now, we typically divide inferences into two types. Okay, there is what we call deduction, and you have probably heard that word before, deduction. And on the other side, what is called induction. And, you may or may not have heard that word before. All right, deduction versus induction. Two kinds of inference here. All right? So now, the difference in deduction and induction. Well, to make that difference clear, let me imagine an argument with two premises. I'll define that, give you a clear definition of that later, but to make this a little simpler, I'm not going to define premise right now. Just think of it as the evidence, okay, that leads to a conclusion. So in a lot of arguments, you have two premises. I'm just going to draw a line to represent those premises, and then you have a conclusion. So the premises lead to the conclusion. All right? In my imaginary argument here, I have two premises and a conclusion, right? And again, the premises lead to the conclusion. So the idea is, in a deduction, the premises lead to the conclusion by necessity. I'm going to put a D over here for induction on one side and induction on the other. Okay, two kinds of inference. All right, and again, In deduction, the conclusion follows of necessity from the premises. In other words, it could not be otherwise in a valid deduction. So let me just give you an example of a deduction. Everyone here is over 2 inches tall. Dr. Pena is here. Therefore, Dr. Pena is over 2 inches tall. That's a deductive inference. All right? Given the premises we have, and we always just assume the premises are true. Given those premises, everyone here is over 2 inches tall. Second premise, Dr. Pena is here. Conclusion, therefore Dr. Pena is over 2 inches tall. Given that, given those premises, the conclusion follows of necessity. There's no way around it, okay? Now compare that to the following. About every Easter, it has got cold in Houston. It's Easter now, so it is about to get cold. That doesn't have to be the case. Now, in my experience, since I've been in Houston, it virtually always happens. There's a cold spell at Easter time. But it doesn't have to be that way. That was not a deductive inference. That was not a necessity. Let me give you another deductive inference. Let's see. All whales are Democrats. This thing is a whale. Therefore, this thing is a Democrat. That's a deduction, right? It has to be the case. Given the truth of the premises, the conclusion follows of necessity. That's a deductive inference. That is deduction. Now, what is inductive inference? Well, in one sense, you can just think of it as just the opposite. That is to say, when the conclusion does not follow of a necessity, right? It's a, I'm going to put here PRB, it's a probability, okay? It's a probability. It's like the one I mentioned a moment ago. You can put it this way, every Easter since I've been here, it has got cold. It is about to be Easter, therefore it's about to get cold. That is a probability. And depending on what the inference is, it might in some cases be a very, very high probability. For example, it's a very, very high probability the sun will be there tomorrow, right? I mean, given that the sun has been there, let's see, 365 times a year times 4.6 billion years, 4.6 billion times 365, that means that it is a very high probability, 0.9999 whatever, that the sun will be there tomorrow. It's not a necessity, okay? So, no matter how high the probability is, only a probability of 1 is a necessity, okay? So, or 100% if you want to say it that way. So, in an inductive inference, the premises lead probabilistically to the conclusion, okay? In a deductive inference, the conclusion cannot be otherwise. The premises lead by necessity to the conclusion. Okay, do we see the difference? Now let's think about this idea of probability and of necessity and probability induction and deduction just a little further. Look, I think by far the majority of the inferences you make every day, and you make lots of inferences every day if you're conscious, are inductive inferences. They're not deductive. You don't use necessity a great deal. You use it, but not a lot. Okay? For example, I don't know, when I post this video, based on my past experiences, I infer that it will load to the cloud in some way, right? It'll post on to Blackboard in some way. That's an inductive inference, right? I've got good reason, good grounds for it. It's very likely, but it's inductive. It's not a necessity, right? I don't know, when you logged in on your computer, you inferred that it's not going to explode on you, right? That was a good inference. When you turn the key in your car, you infer that it's not going to explode, right? It could. It's just given all your experiences and what you know about the world, what you know about mechanical devices, what you know about automobiles, you know it is extremely unlikely. But it was an inductive inference. There was no necessity that your car won't explode, right? So you don't use deduction a great deal. In fact, a lot of philosophers and logicians will even contend that deduction may be exclusive really to mathematics and logic. That is to say, That's kind of an extreme statement. That is to say, you rarely find deduction applying to the world around you. Just think about all the things you do every day, every decision you make, everything that you do that depended on a set of all kinds of decisions. Those decisions are made based on induction. Very, very few on deduction. So how can we use deduction? Well, let me give you an example here. Let's say that, we're back on campus, and let's say you wanted to borrow a stapler. I say I don't have one here, but in my office there is one. So here is my set of keys. I've got 3 keys on that keychain. And I tell you, one of these keys opens the door of my office. I don't know which one. So you go to my office. And let's say you're about to do this, but you're a real careful person. So you say, I better number these keys so I don't get mixed up. And you take a little marker or something and you put a little 1, a 2, and a 3 on these keys. So let's say you try key number 1 and it doesn't work. Then you try key number 3 and it doesn't work. And you say, whoa, wait a minute, let me sit down and think about this. All right, key 1 doesn't work. You write this down. You're real slow and you're a deliberate person, okay? Key 1 doesn't work. Well, let's back up. Let's make a whole argument here. The first premise would be one of the 3 keys opens the door. Second premise, key 1 does not open the door. Third premise, key 3 does not open the door. All right, so we're ready for our conclusion. Our conclusion is key 2 opens the door. Now see, that is arrived at deductively. That was a deduction. Because given the truth of the 3 premises, the conclusion had to be true. Right? It had to be. Given especially, remember, the first premise, one of the 3 keys opens the door. Second premise, key 1 doesn't. Third premise, key 3 doesn't. So then it had to follow of necessity the key 2. Now, something like that, of course, you're not that deliberate, I imagine. Something like that in your head, if you were trying the key, just happened so fast you don't even think about it, but you carried out a deduction, right? That was a deduction. I read once about a dog, actually. It's very similar, I guess. Yeah, that's why I'm thinking of this maybe. A Frenchman, a famous Frenchman, Montaigne, his essays, this is from the 16th century. He says he once saw a hound dog, he thought was engaging in deduction, and that is because he was chasing a deer or something out in the woods. Well, he was following his trail. He couldn't see the deer. And it runs along a path. There was a trodden path in the forest, and the dog goes along it. And then it forks so that there are 3 different paths. And he says that the dog smelled path 1, and evidently there was no smell there. And he smelled path 2, and evidently there wasn't a smell there. And then without smelling path 3, he bounded down path 3 after the deer, which implies, according to Montaigne, that he was, in fact, reasoning. Since he didn't smell path 3, he was reasoning that path 3 had to be the path the deer went down, that's a process of deduction. Well, okay. I have my doubts about that story. But so, deduction and induction. Look, you don't... think about this. Most things in the world, like... everyday things that are not like the one I just gave you about the keys, where you're trying to find out something about the world. See, you knew one of the keys opened the door, but say you're trying to find something, a physical fact about the world. Deduction, you will never have deduction. It's always going to be induction. Look, I cannot deductively prove to you that I'm standing here, right, in this video. This could be a hoax in some way, elaborate one to be sure, but it could be. There's no deductive proof I can give you. I can give you inductive proof. Remember, induction is proof, just as much as deduction is. Maybe we would like to have deductive proof, but again, many philosophers and logicians insist deductive proofs available in logic and mathematics, and things that you can set up, as I did with the key thing, that don't give you real information about the real world. So, I cannot give you deductive proof I'm here. You cannot deductively prove to me that you exist. None of us can deductively prove the boiling point of water. See, your textbook may say 100 degrees Celsius at sea level is the boiling point of water, but you cannot deductively prove that. All you can offer me is inductive proof, and that's great. That's all I need. The inductive proof will be found in a book, or we can carry out an experiment. Well, we can do it 400 times. And I say, well, maybe the 401st time it won't boil at 100 Celsius. So you cannot give me deductive proof. None of us can prove deductively that we existed 10 minutes ago. I mean, you can't deductively prove to yourself or anybody else you existed 10 minutes ago. You could have popped into existence 5 minutes ago with all these memories intact already. Yeah. You know, that's just so unlikely, and everything you know about the world suggests that that isn't the case, such that there's no problem accepting the inductive proof we have that we've been existing for more than 5 minutes. We have plenty of inductive proof. It would be irrational to insist that the inductive proof we have is not sufficient, right? That we have existed more than 5 minutes, despite what you might see in the Matrix or something. We don't need deductive proof to convict someone of a crime either, right? Yeah, I mean, for example, let's say you see the guy, you know, somebody breaks into the jewelry store, and you know, the alarm goes off. The police get there. They find the guy on the floor. They find him with the jewelry and the watches and everything in his trench coat. They find the broken window where he came in. There's a blood stain on the window where a person cut himself. When they do an analysis of him, it turns out that's his blood, matches his blood. There's also a CCTV camera that sees him come in and break it and do it, and he confesses. That's still not deductive proof. That it still isn't deductive proof. There's no necessity there. There's an enormous amount of probability, plenty to convict him. He'll go to jail for that. But it's just not deductive, right? Somebody could have hacked into the CCTV camera. Somebody paid him to confess. Somebody put his blood there. Somebody put the trench coat, drugged him, put him asleep, carried his body into the jewelry store, put the trench coat on him. Oh, that's so unbelievably unlikely that you don't need to worry about it, right? Yeah. You've got plenty of proof here that, in fact, what really happened is he just committed this crime. You have plenty of inductive proof. So you don't need deductive proof to convict someone of a crime. And in fact, if you had to have deductive proof to convict someone of a crime, no one would ever be convicted of a crime. So now, if we think about our daily inferences, as I said, almost all of them are inductive, but not quite all of them. We can have deductive proof in some cases, and I gave you an example of one, and next time I'll give you more examples of them. All right, guys, that's it for now.